have produced a common frustrating experience that's shared by tens of millions of Americans every week. Their employer sends their paycheck, but it takes up to 2 days for the check to hit their bank account. That delay contributes to the use of high-cost check cashers or payday lenders to get their money in time to pay their bills. Some are forced to draw against already low balances, and they're charged overdraft fees. Estimates suggest Americans spend $15 billion or more each year on such fees and services. Essentially, that's a tax of about $100 per working American, due mostly to inefficiency, and it's disproportionately borne by people with lower incomes. The system is even more expensive and frustrating when you zoom out and look internationally. If you live in a G7 country, you may pay below 2% in transaction and conversion fees to send money across the border. If you live in the developing world, you may pay as high as 10%. And these costs disproportionately impact the 250 million plus migrants around the world who send an average of $200 to $300 in remittances to their families each month. So proponents of digital assets envision a more efficient payment system with instantaneous transactions and lower costs no matter where you live. Well, question, will the technology live up to that promise? Personally, I think it's too early to tell. Issues like processing time, cost, and technological barriers to access will need to be overcome. And the U.S. is actively involved in the work of the G20 to address challenges and frictions with cross-border funds transfers. And in 2023, the Federal Reserve currently plans to launch FedNow, which is an instant payment service that will enable payment in real time, around the clock, every day of the year within the U.S. payment system. Now, some have also suggested that the introduction of a central bank digital currency, or CBDC as it's known, could contribute to a more efficient payment system. As a liability of the central bank, a CBDC could become a form of trusted money, something comparable to physical cash, but potentially offering some of the projected benefits of digital assets. Under the executive order, the administration will publish a report on the future of money and payments. And the report will analyze possible design choices related to a potential CBDC and implications for payment systems, economic growth, financial stability, financial inclusion, and national security. Innovation that improves our lives while appropriately managing risks should be embraced. But we must also be mindful that financial innovation of the past too often has not benefited working families, and sometimes it's exacerbated inequality, given rise to illicit finance risks, and increased systemic financial risk. And that brings me to my next lesson. Lesson 2. When regulation fails to keep pace with innovation, vulnerable people often suffer the greatest harm. Look, this is a painful lesson we learned during the global financial crisis. Financial institutions called shadow banks and an explosion of new financial products allowed dangerous levels of risk to accumulate. Beginning in 2007, investors grew wary of these risks, and some large institutions began to falter. Soon, people who had never heard of a shadow bank or a subprime mortgage-backed security, they ended up losing their jobs and their life savings. The S&P fell by more than half. Household net worth dropped precipitously. The resulting economic distress was most acute and long-lasting for Black Americans and other Americans of color. And we need to ensure that the growth of digital assets does not allow similarly dangerous risks to emerge or lead to disproportionate impacts to vulnerable communities. Already, the Treasury has worked with the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, the FDIC, and the OCC, that's the controller of the currency, to study stablecoins, which are a type of cryptocurrency that's pegged to a stable source of value, often the US dollar. Stablecoins raise policy concerns, including those related to illicit finance, user protection, and systemic risk. And they're currently subject to inconsistent and fragmented oversight. To peg their stablecoin to $1, most issuers say that they back their coins with traditional assets that are safe and liquid. And this way, whenever you want to trade your stablecoin back into $1, the company says it has the money to make the exchange. But right now, no one can assure you that will happen. In times of stress, this type of uncertainty could lead to a run. And this is not hypothetical. A stablecoin run occurred in June 2021 when a sharp drop in the price of the assets used to back a stablecoin set off a negative feedback loop of stablecoin redemptions and further price declines. The President's Working Group report on stablecoins assesses these risks and proposes concrete solutions. And we're now working with Congress to advance legislation to help ensure that stablecoins are resilient to risks that could endanger consumers or the broader financial system. We're also working closely with our international partners to promote consistent regulation and supervision across jurisdictions. Of course, stablecoins are just one piece of a much larger ecosystem of digital assets. And our regulatory frameworks should be designed to support responsible innovation while managing risks, and especially those that could disrupt the financial system and the economy. As banks and other traditional financial firms become more involved in digital asset markets, regulatory frameworks will need to appropriately reflect the risks of these new activities. And new types of intermediaries, such as digital asset exchanges and other digital native intermediaries, these should be subject to appropriate forms of oversight. We also need to be prepared for possible changes in the structure of financial markets. For example, some have suggested that distributed ledger technology could reduce concentration in financial markets. While this could make markets less vulnerable to the failure of any particular firm, it's critical to ensure we maintain visibility into potential buildups of systemic risk and continue to have effective tools for tamping down excesses where they arise. President Biden's executive order calls on the Financial Stability Oversight Council to identify specific financial stability risks and regulatory gaps that are posed by various types of digital assets and to make recommendations to address them. And I say that I don't know what the FSOC will find at this point or conclude, but there is one basic lesson that should apply. That lesson is that regulation should be based on risks and activities and not on specific technologies. When new technologies enable new activities, products, and services, well, financial regulation needs to adjust. But that process should be guided by the risks associated with the services that are provided to households and businesses, and not based on the underlying technology. In other words, whenever possible, regulation should be tech neutral. For example, consumers, investors, and businesses should be protected from fraud and from misleading statements, regardless of whether assets are stored on a balance sheet or they're